I pride myself as being the bravest of my friends. As the designated mom friend, I'm expected to rally the troops and keep an eye out for danger. Considering that my friends and I always seem to stumble into sketchy situations, I'm well versed in getting us out of trouble. More often than not, that means that I have to muster more courage than usual to make sure that my well-meaning but trouble magnet friends walk away unscathed. But even mom friend bravery has its limits. In our first year of camp together, our counselors sat us down around the campfire and told us of the legends of the camp. Most of them were admittedly pretty dull, but one story stuck out. And although I would never admit it, it terrified me. It was the tale of the 3 headless nuns. Legend has it that if you see 3 pairs of red pinprick lights in your window, it's the eyes of the nuns holding their heads up to look into your cabin. That much effort wouldn't be necessary at the front of the cabin, thanks to the front porch. If they're standing at the back of the cabin though, they have to hold their heads in their hands. The cabin is elevated from the ground on cement blocks, and you can't look in unless you're standing on a chair, or unless you can detach your head and hold it up to look into the window. As the story goes, before the campsite was bought by the current owners, it was farmland. Way back in the early colonial days, there was a horrible drought. The crops failed and the villagers started to go hungry. They had enough to last them the winter, but they would need to pray for a bountiful harvest next year. The next year came. The harvest did not. Now the villagers were starving. As anyone would in New England during the early 1800s, they turned to the church. 3 nuns agreed to plead with God on their behalf and pray for a good harvest. A fortnight went by since that day. The nuns prayed and blessed the fields and shared with the villagers what little resources they had. But soon enough, the villagers' hunger had grown to a desperate rage, and that rage quickly turned to madness. Seeing their crops continuing to fail, they concocted a horrific plan. On that fateful night, the 3 nuns prayed for the village's harvest to be bountiful. Cued by their amen, the villagers' shovels came swiftly down on their heads. The next morning, the villagers greeted each other with enthusiasm and glee. They watched with grand smiles as the fields were sprinkled with fertilizer, still fresh from the night before. And as though God himself had prepared the land, the harvest was plentiful at last. Our counselors told us that when the sports field for our camp was being landscaped sometime in the 50s, bone fragments were found. The bones were cut clean through, as though a great, desperate force had taken a meat cleaver to them and shattered the skeleton into fragments. To top off the story and terrify us even more, the counselors said that the villagers couldn't bear the thought of ruining the lovely faces of the nuns and spared their heads alone from becoming fertilizer. The severed heads were buried beneath a maple tree outside of the village. That maple tree stands now in the midpoint of the trail leading to Cabin 5. Cabin 5 was basically the camp infirmary and administration building. Incidentally, it was also the farthest. A central lamppost lit up the grounds connected cabins 1 to 4, and since they were all fairly loose together, we could still walk from cabin to cabin at night with relative confidence. The path to Cabin 5 was another story entirely. First of all, the lamp didn't reach it, no thanks to the cover of a tall, thick tree line between it and the path. That meant that at night the path was pitch black, and any light you brought never shone too far in front of you. You were effectively surrounded by darkness. That's why, when my friends tasked me with getting stomach medicine for one of our bunkmates, I was less than enthusiastic to take on the job. Out of obligation as the mom friend, I accepted, but I still asked if anyone wanted to keep me company on the road. I was instantly hit with a chorus, "Oh hell no," as my so-called friends vehemently refused. Out of luck and out of options, I stomped away begrudgingly from the cabin with my Barbie flashlight in hand. I slowed nearer to the entrance of the path to Cabin 5. I could just barely make out the front porch light of the cabin, far, far ahead at the other end. Anything between me and that? Nothing. I gulped in a breath and began to make my way down the path. Being encased in complete darkness really does a number on your nerves. I walked briskly, but paid extra attention so that I didn't make any unnecessary noises. I felt eyes on me at every angle, every chirp of a bug, every snap of a twig, and every crunch of my feet on the dirt and rocks sent my head hammering against my ribcage. I practically leapt up the front steps of Cabin 5 and burst inside, out of breath from the adrenaline. The camp nurse looked up at me with raised eyebrows as I heaved for air. I shot my hand out. "Tummy meds, please." Not 30 seconds later, I was sent on my way. I was scolded for having come without a counselor, but I was 10 now and could at least find my way back just fine. She shut the front door of the cabin behind me, and I stared out into the path. It seemed longer now than it had before, spurred on by the promise of a warm sleeping bag waiting for me at my cabin. I took the steps slowly, eyeing the forest around me. Strangely, all was still. No wind, no crickets, no snapping of twigs. It was pure and imposing silence. I considered running back inside and asking the nurse to walk me back, but the image of my friends laughing at me for being a chicken seemed a lot worse than a brisk walk through the path. And so I started back down the path. The only sound was my shoes on the dirt. My breath was quick and harsh, and flared my nostrils as I looked around with wide eyes and pressed lips. The porch light of Cabin 5 went out suddenly. With it, so too did my courage. I froze in my tracks, completely surrounded by the suffocating darkness. The beam of my Barbie flashlight trembled. I couldn't tell you how long I was standing there, until I heard it. At first, it was far off. The sound was faint but distinct. Footsteps, uneven and heavy, stumbling. It came from my left. I willed my legs to move. They refused. And then again from my right. The same footsteps. They struggled. Finally, from behind, crunching on rocks and dirt instead of twigs and leaves. Finally, my body obeyed me, and I spun around. My flashlight then stole the form of a dark figure, jerking down the path behind me. My flashlight hit the ground as I sprinted at full force away from the path. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see their broken and contorted figures converge onto the path together to watch me flee. I flew up the steps of my cabin as the main lamppost died and burst through the front door. I slammed into a bunk bed, panting and gasping harder than when I'd made it to cabin 5. My friends stared at me from their bunks with confusion in their eyes. I tossed the sick girl her stomach medicine and hopped into my sleeping bag without another word. And then pandemonium. Deafening bangs crashed through our eardrums from the doors and windows. Ghoulish screeching and anguish howling invaded the room, interlaced with our own shrieks of terror. The walls themselves seemed to be rumbling down from the sheer force. We huddled all together in the farthest corner from the front door, watching as 3 pairs of red lights shone through the window at us. Eyes, tears streaked our faces, and we screamed and screamed until our throats were torn and our terror soundless. Silence, then a giggle, and then full-blown laughter. Our counselors piled into the cabin, their faces wet from laughing themselves to tears. Shaken and unmoving, we watched them silently as they had a fit of hysteria. The administrators held nothing back in disciplining them for their prank. Looking back now as an adult, even I wouldn't have pulled a stunt so evil on a bunch of kids, no matter how rotten they were. My friends and I often recall the story, laughing about the trauma it caused us all. I laugh along now. After all, it was pretty funny in hindsight. And hey, I think we all turned out pretty okay. My friends would talk about how freaked out they were when the red lights, which we later found out were laser pointers acting as glowing eyes, had shone through the front window. When they bring up that part though, I tend not to laugh along. We had all seen eyes looking into the cabin that night, sure. I've always felt guilty, though, for not being entirely truthful with them. In all honesty, I've been too scared to tell them what really happened. I still don't want to accept it myself. The 3 pairs of eyes I'd seen weren't staring from the front porch window. They were glaring in from the back.